So today we will discuss about the data policy. Today we will discuss about the data policies. Data policies, what happened? We already discussed uh, earlier. The client side, what will execute, client script, and the UI policies. If you come to the server side, data policy, script include, and the business tools. The data policy, by using data policy, what we will do is we can make a field mandatory, read only, we can make a field mandatory and read only. But when you come to the here, when you come to the sir, oh my god, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Thank you. So today we will discuss about when the data policy, when the data policy it will execute and the server side, and it will execute in the server side. And from the data policy, what we can do is we can make a field mandatory and read only. We can make we can make a mandatory and read only. Let's open the instance. Yeah. So I will open this our work order. What happened? So last we have done what we had from that developer. So if that is from the EA policy, if the state is development, the developer lead has to mandatory for this. But so if the state is development, then this development is visible and mandatory. But what I am going to do is but when you open from the farm view, if you open the farm view, development lead, and I'm just putting the state. See, for example, if I'm just removing here, sorry. So from here I'm just marking this one as a, that means this ua policy will be work in the server level, not in the database level. Sorry, ua policy will always work in the form level. It's not like work in the list level. This is the list level. For example, if I change this one to my development lead, Still it is loading. What happened? Still it is loading. Okay, that's okay. So for example, this is empty record. So for this one, what happened if I'm going to development? This development lead is not mandatory. For example, if I open this one, here the record, now here it was mandatory. That means this data policy will be executed in the server side level and UA policy will be executed in the form level. So whatever you are saying, this is the form level. Here it is a list level. What are the changes we have done in the list? It will execute in the server level. So that's the reason we can use the data policy. So if you want to write a data policy, the same thing, right click, go to the configure and data policy. So if I want to write a data policy also, it will stored in a table called sys underscore so data underscore policy table. So this is the table where data policy can save it. Now I'm just going to new. Again, the table it was uninherited. So the table, what is the table and we can give it. Here I'm just making development details. So mandatory. Here the inherits is nothing but if you want to execute the same thing with the if you want to execute the same thing with the what you called with the child technology, so that we can use the same thing for it. Now what we can do it here is, I'm sorry, now what we can do is, this is the one, and reverse if false is nothing but if you want to execute, this is a reverse if false. We have seen that. I will show with an example. And active is true if you want visible, and apply to imports it. Apply to imports it is nothing but if you want to execute the same thing, the data, we want to execute the load the data, we can use the what you called imports it. So that we can show with an example. Apply to soap. Whenever we are doing an integration, we can use the apply to soap, and you as a UA policy and client is nothing but you want to execute it in the as a client policy. Sorry, as a UA policy, it will show it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to define the condition state is development, and I'm marking as a save. Now what I have done is I just added a condition that is a state is development so that this UA policy will work it. Sorry, this data policy will work it. Now what I need to write? I need to write a what has to execute it. That means here I'm just going to the development lead. Development lead will become a read only. Sorry, we cannot make a read only and mandatory as true. So by using data policies, you can make a field read only. So read only and mandatory only. You cannot work on the this visibility true or false for the data policy for the same thing. Now what we can do is here Now what we are going to do is, so we are just making this development lead is a mandatory, and read only we have not given whatever the read only here earlier, the same thing we can configure the same here. Now what we have to do it is, so now again I'm just going to client instance. So if I open this one, client instance is true, client URL verified, I'm just marking as a read only and save this one. Now let's see what would happen is, earlier if I change to development, it doesn't ask the development lead. So what I'm going to do is, see what happened, the data policy exception stating that the following fields are mandatory, which is a development lead. That means if the data, whatever the data is adding here, that means here from this data policy, whatever the data we are having is, it will be useful for the same thing here. So which means whatever, so for example, see, it will not allow to use the exception. So if you give mark the change to development, the system didn't allow you to log into the development lead. That's a basic scenario what we can do the same thing. So here when you come to here, so here what I'm going to do is, in this one we have an UA policy. I am marking that UA policy as a false. Right click configure, we have already written UA policy, right? So I'm just active. So this one, now if I open this one, just reload. See, right now it was not there. So if the state is become development, and this is become a mandatory and false, it's mandatory. So why? Because here in the development we are using the UA policy and a client, or else if you mark this one as a false and save this record, so this is not executing, and you can directly, if you go to the state is development, then it will not show you. And if you record as a save, when you are trying to save it, that is, then it was showing data policy exception, the following fields are mandatory, development lead invalid update, it was showing. Now if I am going there, so that is a data policy advantage. So that means if you want to execute as a client side also, you can mark as a true, so that if you mark as a true and save it, what it happens. So if I have changes to development, okay, let me share reload this. See what it happens, it was showing as a mandatory, as we are doing a something from the client side, we are executing the same thing for it. So that means here what we are going to do it here, here what we are going to do it here is, so if you want to execute this data policy, will be executed in the one. And in the interview, the most common asked question is, what is the difference between data policy and UI policy? I want to execute data policy in the client side also. How we can do it? If you want, you can note down these interview questions. This is the thing we can do it. So this is the basic. If you want, you can convert this as a UA policy. And what happens if you convert this UA policy? It will not show as a. It will not. It will execute in the. It will not say as execute in the server side. If you open this, convert to this data policy, a new data policy is created, and this is the UA. What is the we have given? This is the UA policy actions for it. And from here the same thing. For example, if I am reload, see, it was become mandatory. And if I am going to save this one, the following fields are mandatory. And also here, if I am going changing to development, since it is a execute in the client level, which is in the form level, so it will not execute in the list level, the IA policy. This is the, we are not sure it's a drawback or something. It should be the same thing for it. This is the basic thing about the data policy. So till now what we discussed, anyone has any questions on the data policy before going to the next topic? Very good. Next thing, what we can do it here is, now, so